Picture this. You're 23, standing at the edge of what feels like forever, and she walks into the room. Time doesn't just slow down, it fractures. Your heart becomes a thunderstorm, your thoughts scatter like autumn leaves, and suddenly, the entire universe seems to revolve around the gravitational pull of her smile. In that moment, you would move mountains, swim oceans, and rewrite the very laws of physics just to exist in her orbit for one more second. But what if I told you that this feeling, this intoxicating, all-consuming fire that we call love might be the very thing that blinds us to our own freedom? What if the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer was right when he whispered across centuries that romantic love is nature's most elaborate deception, designed not for our happiness, but for something far more primal and unconscious? Today, we journey into the depths of one of philosophy's most controversial yet profoundly insightful minds. Schopenhauer's message to young men about love and women isn't meant to diminish the beauty of human connection or reduce women to philosophical abstractions. Instead, it's an invitation to see beyond the veil of our own desires, to understand the forces that drive us, and ultimately, to choose our path with eyes wide open. In a world where love songs promise eternal bliss and romantic movies paint passion as life's ultimate purpose, Schopenhauer dared to ask the uncomfortable question: what if we're not the authors of our own romantic story? What if we're merely actors in nature's grand play, following a script written by forces far older and more cunning than our conscious minds? Consider the young man who abandons his dreams, his friendships, his very identity the moment he falls in love. Watch how he transforms from a sovereign individual into a satellite, orbiting endlessly around another person's approval. Schopenhauer observed this pattern with the precision of a scientist and the compassion of someone who had walked this path himself. He saw how love could elevate us to the highest peaks of ecstasy, only to cast us into the deepest valleys of despair. But here's where Schopenhauer's wisdom becomes truly transformative. He wasn't advocating for a loveless existence. He was calling for conscious love, love that recognizes its own nature, love that doesn't surrender the self, love that enhances rather than diminishes our humanity. The philosopher once wrote that nature cares nothing for the individual, only for the species. When we fall in love, we become unwitting servants to this biological imperative. The butterflies in your stomach, the sleepless nights, the constant thoughts of your beloved, these aren't just romantic feelings. They're nature's way of ensuring genetic continuation wrapped in the beautiful packaging of human emotion. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how love often strikes hardest with someone who embodies qualities that complement your own weaknesses? The quiet, introspective soul falls for the vivacious extrovert. The logical mind becomes enchanted by the artistic spirit. Schopenhauer suggested this isn't coincidence, it's nature's algorithm, calculating the optimal genetic combination for future offspring, even when children are the furthest thing from the lovers' conscious minds. This realization might initially feel cold, even cynical. But Schopenhauer invites us to find liberation in understanding. When we recognize the biological underpinnings of romantic attraction, we don't diminish love's beauty, we reclaim our agency within it. We stop being unconscious participants and become conscious co-creators of our romantic destiny. The young man who understands this doesn't become incapable of love. He becomes incapable of losing himself in love. He recognizes that his worth isn't determined by another's affection, that his happiness doesn't depend on romantic success, that his life's meaning extends far beyond the realm of romantic partnership. Schopenhauer lived this philosophy. He never married, not out of misogyny or fear, but from a deep understanding that his greatest contributions to humanity would come through maintaining his intellectual independence. He chose the solitary path not because he couldn't love, but because he loved his freedom more deeply than any romantic entanglement. This isn't a call for all men to live as hermits. Rather, it's an invitation to enter relationships from a place of strength rather than need, from wholeness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion. When you're not desperately seeking completion in another person, you're free to offer your authentic self to a partnership. Consider the difference between the man who courts a woman because he believes she will solve his loneliness, and the man who invites a woman into an already fulfilling life. The first approaches love like a beggar at a feast, grateful for any scraps of affection. The second approaches love like a king offering to share his kingdom not because he needs to, but because he chooses to. Schopenhauer observed that men often idealize women, projecting onto them qualities that exist more in imagination than reality. We fall in love with our own fantasies, seeing angels where there are simply human beings. This idealization serves no one well, not the men who inevitably face disappointment, nor the women who must live under the weight of impossible expectations. True wisdom lies in seeing people clearly, appreciating their humanity without demanding their perfection. When we stop seeking goddesses and start appreciating human beings, we open ourselves to authentic connection rather than the painful dance of projection and disillusionment. The philosopher also recognized that women, like men, are playing their own roles in nature's grand design. They too are subject to biological imperatives, social pressures, and unconscious drives. Understanding this creates space for compassion rather than resentment, empathy rather than blame. We're all navigating the same human condition, trying to balance our animal instincts with our higher aspirations. But perhaps Schopenhauer's most profound insight was this: the man who achieves true independence, emotional, financial, intellectual, becomes paradoxically more attractive to quality partners. When you're not desperately seeking love, love finds you more easily. When you're not trying to prove your worth through romantic conquest, your inherent worth shines through. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means developing what we might call loving detachment, the ability to care deeply while holding lightly, to invest emotionally while maintaining perspective, to open your heart while keeping your center. Picture the tree that bends in the storm but doesn't break. Its roots run deep, its trunk remains strong, yet its branches dance with the wind. This is the kind of love Schopenhauer advocated: flexible yet rooted, responsive yet stable, passionate yet sustainable. The young man who embraces this philosophy doesn't become a monk. He becomes a king of his own domain. He pursues his passions, builds his character, develops his mind, and creates a life so rich and meaningful that romantic love becomes an enhancement rather than a necessity. When such a man does choose to love, he loves freely. His affection isn't born from desperation, but from appreciation. His commitment isn't driven by fear of loneliness, but by genuine choice. His relationship becomes a collaboration between two whole people rather than a fusion of two incomplete halves. Schopenhauer would remind us that every great man in history, every artist, philosopher, inventor, leader, had to navigate this same territory. Those who remained unconscious slaves to romantic obsession often saw their potential diminished. Those who achieved mastery over their desires without destroying their capacity for love often left the greatest legacies. This mastery isn't about suppression or denial. It's about understanding. When you understand why your heart races when she smiles, you can appreciate the beauty without losing your balance. When you recognize the evolutionary purpose behind your protective instincts, you can act from wisdom rather than blind compulsion. The path Schopenhauer illuminated isn't easy, but it's profound. It requires us to question our deepest assumptions about love, happiness, and fulfillment. It asks us to find meaning beyond romantic success, to build identity independent of another's approval, to create a life so compelling that love becomes a choice rather than a necessity. This philosophy doesn't promise a life without pain. Love will still bring its challenges, its complexities, its inevitable sorrows, but it promises something perhaps more valuable: a life lived with awareness. A love chosen rather than compelled, a relationship entered from strength rather than weakness. As you stand at the crossroads of your own romantic journey, Schopenhauer's wisdom whispers across time. You are more than your desires. You are greater than your need for approval. You are capable of love that elevates rather than diminishes, that creates rather than consumes, that liberates rather than imprisons. The woman who enters your life should find not a half person seeking completion, but a whole individual choosing to share his fullness. She should encounter not a beggar seeking charity, but a king offering partnership. She should meet not someone who needs her to feel worthy, but someone who wants her because he recognizes her worth. This is Schopenhauer's gift to the young men of every generation. The recognition that true love begins with the courage to be complete within yourself. When you no longer need love to feel whole, you become capable of the kind of love that makes others feel whole too. In a world that often confuses intensity with depth, dependency with devotion, and possession with love, this philosopher's voice rings clear across centuries. Choose consciousness over compulsion, understanding over obsession, freedom over bondage. In doing so, you don't lose the capacity for love, you finally gain the capacity for love that lasts. The young man who heeds this message doesn't become incapable of romantic rapture. He becomes incapable of romantic slavery. He doesn't lose his heart, finds his soul. He doesn't avoid love. He finally becomes worthy of it. This is the path of the conscious lover, the aware partner, the free man who chooses his bonds. It's a path that leads not away from love, but toward love's highest expression, connection that enhances rather than diminishes, that liberates rather than imprisons, that creates rather than consumes. Think of the master craftsman who has spent years perfecting his art. When he finally creates his masterpiece, it's not from desperation or need, but from skill, passion, and choice. This is how the conscious man approaches love, not as an amateur fumbling in the dark, but as someone who has mastered himself first. Schopenhauer understood that suffering in love often comes not from love itself, but from our unconscious relationship with it. The man who bases his self-worth on romantic success will inevitably suffer, because he has made his happiness dependent on variables beyond his control. But the man who finds his worth in his character, his growth, his contributions to the world, this man can love without attachment to outcomes. Consider how differently you approach friendships versus romantic relationships. With friends, you're likely more relaxed, more authentic, less concerned with impressing, and more focused on genuine connection. Why? Because your identity isn't on the line. You don't need your friend's approval to feel whole. Schopenhauer would ask, what if you could bring this same groundedness to romantic love? The philosopher observed that men often become different people when pursuing women less authentic, more performative, willing to compromise their values for affection. This transformation reveals how little we truly know ourselves. When under love's influence, the conscious man, however, remains himself regardless of romantic circumstances. His personality doesn't shift with his relationship status, because his foundation is internal, not external. This internal foundation isn't built overnight. It requires years of self-discovery, of facing your shadows, of developing genuine interests and pursuits that fulfill you, independent of romantic validation. It means building a relationship with solitude so intimate that you actually enjoy your own company. When you can sit alone in a room and feel content rather than anxious, you've achieved something precious, the kind of self-possession that makes you magnetic to others. Schopenhauer lived in an era when men were expected to marry young and settle quickly into domestic life. Yet he recognized that this social pressure often led to premature commitments made from fear rather than wisdom. How much more relevant is this insight in our modern age, where dating apps promise infinite options but often deliver infinite confusion? The young man swimming in today's sea of romantic possibilities needs Schopenhauer's compass more than ever. Without internal direction, he becomes lost in the endless pursuit of the next match, the next conversation, the next possibility. He mistakes motion for progress, confusing the excitement of novelty with the satisfaction of genuine connection. But there's something deeper here that Schopenhauer intuited about the nature of desire itself. He understood that wanting something creates a form of suffering the gap between what we have and what we wish we had. This isn't to say all desire is negative, but rather that understanding our desires gives us power over them, rather than letting them have power over us. When you desperately want someone's love, you're in a state of psychological poverty, constantly measuring your worth against their responses. But when you want to share love from a place of abundance, the entire dynamic shifts. You're no longer trying to get something. You're choosing to give something. This shift from taking to giving transforms not just your relationships, but your entire experience of being human. The master of conscious love develops what we might call emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel deeply while maintaining perspective, to care intensely while holding lightly. He learns that his emotional states are his responsibility, not his partner's. He stops looking to others to regulate his moods, to validate his choices, to provide meaning for his existence. This doesn't create coldness, creates warmth that doesn't burn. It generates passion that doesn't consume. It builds love that elevates rather than diminishes both people involved. When two emotionally sovereign individuals choose to love each other, they create something beautiful not because they need each other, but because they've chosen each other from a place of freedom. Schopenhauer would remind us that this journey toward conscious love is ultimately a journey toward consciousness itself. Every time you choose awareness over reactivity, every time you respond rather than merely react, every time you love from choice rather than compulsion, you're evolving beyond your biological programming into something more consciously human. The path isn't without its challenges. There will be moments when every fiber of your being wants to abandon this philosophical high ground and dive headfirst into romantic obsession. There will be times when choosing consciousness feels like choosing loneliness. But these are the very moments when the practice matters most, when you're forging the strength that will serve you for a lifetime. Remember that Schopenhauer didn't arrive at these insights through academic study alone, he lived them. He experienced the full spectrum of human emotion, including the intoxicating madness of romantic love. His wisdom came not from avoiding these experiences, but from observing them with the clear eyes of someone committed to understanding rather than simply feeling. In our current age of instant gratification and endless options, his message becomes even more prophetic. We live in a time when relationships are treated as disposable, when commitment is seen as restriction rather than choice, when the grass always seems greener in the next swipe. Against this backdrop, the man who can love deeply while maintaining his center becomes increasingly rare and valuable. This is your invitation to join the ranks of such men, not perfect beings, but conscious ones. Men who understand their own nature deeply enough to transcend it when necessary, who love powerfully enough to let go when required, who care deeply enough to maintain perspective even in passion's grip. The woman who encounters such a man doesn't meet someone trying to use her to fill his emptiness, but someone inviting her to share his fullness. She doesn't find a project to fix or a child to mother, but a partner capable of standing beside her as an equal. This is the gift that conscious love offers not just to you, but to everyone whose life you touch. If Schopenhauer's message has stirred something deep within you, if these words have touched the part of your soul that yearns for both love and freedom, take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Consider the relationships you've built from need versus those you've chosen from strength. Think about the difference between loving someone and needing someone to love you. The philosopher's wisdom isn't about avoiding love. It's about approaching love as a sovereign individual rather than as a dependent child. It's about creating a life so rich, so meaningful, so complete that romantic love becomes the cherry on top rather than the entire dessert. It's about becoming the kind of person who enhances others' lives rather than depending on others to make your life meaningful. If this ancient wisdom speaks to your modern heart, if you're ready to embrace both love and freedom, if you choose to walk the path of conscious love rather than unconscious need, comment below. I choose conscious love. Let this phrase be your declaration of independence from unconscious romantic patterns and your commitment to love that liberates rather than imprisons. Remember, young king, your heart is not your master, it's your valuable advisor. Listen to its counsel, but let your wisdom make the final decisions. In doing so, you honor both your capacity for deep love and your birthright of individual freedom. This is Schopenhauer's enduring gift to every man brave enough to receive it, the recognition that in choosing consciousness, you choose not just better relationships, but a better way of being human.